It's August. We're pretty close to the release of Sandbox. And if you grew up playing Garry's Mod like me, you might be wondering what this new release means for the old legacy. Now I'm going to go and do my best to try to explain what I believe is going to happen over the next few years to Gmod and its player base. But to put it simply, if you only want to stick around for this beginning part, I think Gmod is going to be pretty much replaced by Sandbox as time passes and more content is added into Sandbox that players can experiment with. Now stick around if you want. I'm going to go ahead and do my best to explain my reasoning for these beliefs and how it's going to work in a bit more detail. Gmod, when it launched, it had very little content. The biggest thing it had was the tools for players to make their own content. So you open Garry's Mod and you see all these big game modes, but you have to keep in mind these weren't made by Garry and they weren't made by Facepunch. These are all player creations. So that's something that really sets Garry's Mod out from a lot of other games out there, is the fact that most of its appeal comes in the form of player created content. And when Garry's Mod launched, it didn't have very much content, obviously, because it was primarily just Garry himself working on it. And then as more people got into the game and created their own game modes and their own player models and maps and whatnot, it allowed for an exponential increase of publicity and public interest. And I think something very similar is going to happen with Sandbox. So when Sandbox launches, it's not going to have very much content. It's going to have only what the few hundreds of developers, maybe thousands now, who have access. It's going to have what they've added already. But it's going to be nothing close to what Garry's Mod has already, because Gmod is almost 15 years old. It has 1 million plus workshop contributions. So when you open Sandbox on day one, it's going to look pretty bare in comparison. I think for that reason alone, it's not going to be too popular on day one. Maybe it will, but I wouldn't be surprised if Gmod player charts stay pretty much the same even for a few months after launch. And yes, I think as time passes, Sandbox will come to dominate the Sandbox genre and pretty much replace Garry's Mod out there. Now let's explain what sets Sandbox apart so much from its predecessor and why it's capable of becoming so popular. First things first, the new engine is a huge upgrade. It comes with lots of new tools like the new hammer, the new source filmmaker, the new model dock. Everything that attracted players and developers to Garry's Mod when it first released has an improved version with Sandbox. It's going to be attracting way more developers especially, and I think that fact alone is going to lead to us seeing lots of player content coming out 1 or 2 or 3 months after launch that'll really allow for a spike in the player charts. Next, something to keep in mind is the fact that Sandbox really streamlines the process of getting into the game. When you look at Garry's Mod, it's a bit confusing for a new player to get into because first off you have the problem of mounting games, then you have the weird add-on collection stuff that you have to download, stuff like that. It's sort of a challenge for a lot of new players, and I know it was for me. And all of these are gone in Sandbox because of the way the game is made. Mounting games is a pretty big problem for a lot of players because when you buy Garry's Mod, then you realize, oh, now I have to buy Counter-Strike, and now I have to buy Half-Life 2, and it turns a $15 or whatever Gmod's price tag is now purchase into $40 or more, which is a big hurdle for a lot of players that they don't want to have to deal with. Maybe even more importantly is the fact that now you won't have to download a bunch of external workshop add-ons once you join a server just to see all the content. And the process of actually joining a server, it's not going to be multiple loading bars like you've seen before where it shows you the progress of each individual add-on. It's going to be showing you the progress of the game mode download as a whole, because you're going to be downloading a single file folder rather than a bunch of external add-ons. And you're going to be downloading this file from the server host wherever they've uploaded it to, and it's going to be much more compressed than Gmod game modes because it's only going to include the content they want rather than extra content from add-ons that they don't necessarily need. I expect that a few months after launch, when player game modes start being released more than what's currently in development, we're going to see a huge influx of players going into Sandbox and sticking with it because the process of joining and getting into it is so much easier than in Garry's Mod. And a lot of those players are going to be people that have played Gmod for years who want an upgrade, And it's going to be a lot of new faces too, because this is a genre that's very appealing to a very wide group of people. On day one, I don't expect much to happen to Garry's Mod. I expect that the people who are super hardcore interested in Sandbox would buy it and begin making their own game modes or playing what's available. But I don't think that'll be a substantial player base until a lot of extra content is added by the players after a few months. And then after that point, it's going to be a steady increase of players, I believe. So yes, I do think that Sandbox is going to come to replace Garry's Mod for the vast majority of people. It just offers so much more in terms of development capabilities and optimization, stuff like that, that just make it very appealing. Of course, there's always going to be people who stick with Gmod just because of nostalgia factor, and maybe they just prefer that method of content creation and server creation. But the fact remains that Sandbox is capable of much more than Gmod, and the player counts will reflect that as more content is added. If you had any concerns that Gmod was going to be decimated after the launch of Sandbox, I'm almost positive that that's not going to be the case. There's always going to be people on Gmod, but Sandbox will be much more popular in the years to come than Garry's Mod ever could be. If you want to argue about it, or if you have any questions, just message me below or check out our website, because we have a lot more information there.